Perhaps no American law case in the 20th century has aroused more protest than the trial and execution in Massachusetts of two Italian immigrants, Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, in the 1920s. I recently acquired, under the Freedom of Information Act, a series of reports by agents of the Bureau of Investigation, forerunner of the FBI, on the Sacco-Vanzetti support movement in Connecticut. They open a window into a world of immigrant protest that is rarely remembered today, and they reveal the police surveillance to which the immigrant protesters were subjected. Sacco and Vanzetti, a shoemaker and a peddler, immigrants and anarchists, were arrested in 1920 for the murder of a paymaster and his guard at a Braintree, Massachusetts shoe factory. Both were found guilty, but critics of the trial believed the judge had shown massive prejudice and that much of the evidence was not credible. A 7-year worldwide campaign for a new trial maintained that Sacco and Vanzetti had been convicted, not because they had committed murder, but because of their immigrant background and political beliefs. The fairness of the trial was vouched for by the governor of Massachusetts and by the presidents of Harvard and MIT. It was challenged by some of the leading intellectuals of the day, including Felix Frankfurter, Walter Lippmann, John Dewey, Jane Addams, and John Dos Passos. But in Connecticut, the backbone of the Sacco-Vanzetti defense was composed not of intellectuals, but of the immigrant communities. And while much of the action was organized by radicals of one variety or another, the sympathy for the shoemaker and the peddler stretched to many who shared little of the defendants' political beliefs. The Bureau of Investigation reports I received under the Freedom of Information Act are stamped "Read by William J. Burns, then Director of the Bureau of Investigation." They also bear the stamp "Hoover," presumably J. Edgar Hoover, then Assistant Director. One agent reported visiting the chief of the Hartford Police Department to find out about a meeting for Sacco and Vanzetti at the Grand Theater. The chief told him it was the general policy of people owning halls and theaters to communicate with him and inform him of their offer to rent the hall to persons holding meetings. In this case, the owner had stipulated that the United States and its officers be protected from unfair criticism and ridicule. The meeting was attended by 850. Evidently, the agent was so sharp-eyed he could tell by looking where someone was born, for he stated that the stage was occupied by 19 alleged delegates of labor organizations, most of whom appeared to be either foreign-born or of foreign extraction, while the appearance of one or two indicated that they might probably have been born in the United States. Another report described a conference in Hartford to organize protest activities. The conference fizzled out, but not before the Bureau's agent took down the license numbers of cars parked outside the hall and promised the owners of these machines will be investigated further with a view to ascertaining whether or not they are possessed of radical tendencies. The material I acquired under the Freedom of Information Act also includes a set of letters from William J. Burns, Director of the Bureau of Investigation, to the chiefs of police of Torrington, Willimantic, New Haven, New Britain, Hartford, and 5 other Connecticut towns, supplying the names of everyone in their city to whom copies of the Sacco-Vanzetti Defense Committee's publication had been mailed. I shall indeed be glad to receive from you any information which you may be able to obtain as a result of any investigation which you see fit to make in this matter. Since dozens of Connecticut immigrants had recently been deported without trial on the basis of their radical political beliefs, this request for further investigations represented more than idle curiosity. Who were the immigrant protesters subjected to this surveillance and investigation? Michele Russo grew up in Waterbury's Italian community and remembers the Sacco-Vanzetti defense vividly.
I think Sacco-Vanzetti were executed in 1927, so I was a boy. But I was very aware of this and attended meetings. It was remarkable about the meetings is that the speakers were all foreigners. There were Poles and Italians, and also the halls were filled with police all the time. That impressed me very much, the presence of the police force, and these people were struggling to articulate their ideas and bring the situation before the local public. And I didn't know who the speakers were. I was very young at the time. But I do know there were all immigrants in the audience, and there was a man from New Haven who spoke in Lithuanian, and he was a very powerful speaker, even though you couldn't understand. And there was a very short man, very thin, who was undoubtedly an anarchist, and who spoke very emotionally. The hall was full of police, but the audience seemed to ignore the police, because when a collection was taken, there was a forest of hands of dollar bills that were donated.
The sympathy for Sacco and Vanzetti reached far beyond the Italian community. Lou Lehrman, a Jewish construction worker in New Haven, remembered the day in 1927 when Sacco and Vanzetti were executed. We were working on the apartment house in the corner of Edgewood and Linden Place. When the hour came, everybody on the job came down to the basement, and there was 5 minutes of silence, and then people spoke. There was such a feeling of solidarity about something that wasn't here in New Haven. There wasn't a person on that job, whether he was a boss or a worker, who didn't come down for that moment. When I asked the former mayor of Waterbury, Victor Mambruno, whether there were anarchists, socialists, or other radicals in the immigrant communities in his youth, he replied,
"My most vivid impression of socialism in the city of Waterbury was recalling the night that Sacco and Vanzetti were electrocuted. Now, I know that my dad was an ardent supporter in the innocence of both men, as many of his friends were, a whole group of them. And that night when they were, I know that it was a summer night and we were all outside and waiting, I think at 11 o'clock when they were, and everybody then realized that it was over, and there was these old-timers actually crying, you know, to think that two innocent men, in their viewpoint, that they were executed. And it was, I couldn't imagine why they were so emotional over two people that they had never seen, never knew, and it impressed me, so that I knew that in a kid way, I knew that it must have been because they stood for something that they support.
While the story of immigration to America is often told in terms of success and assimilation, for some it was also a story of oppression and discrimination. So many of Connecticut's immigrants identified so strongly with Sacco and Vanzetti because they too had faced ethnic discrimination on their own jobs and had seen members of their own communities arrested, held without bail, and deported without trial by the federal authorities. They may have hoped that America would be the land of liberty and justice for all, but they did not always find it so. The Sacco-Vanzetti case remains controversial to this day. Massive scholarly books continue to appear, vindicating their innocence, or reaffirming their guilt, or even maintaining that one was innocent and the other guilty. Few, however, defend the legal procedures that led to their execution.